when you're in such this monolithic structure, it's almost like people look at you like you're crazy for breaking protocol. So, while process is critically important and it keeps the train on the tracks, one of the things I want to make sure I unlearn, if you will, is that this is just the way we do it because this is the inertia of the system. And instead, even in a couple months here, going like, I had this exact same conversation with someone here who is in development, like website dev, and they are an incredibly highly skilled designer. And I said to myself, I'm like, well, I've never seen that overlap before. And he goes, I'd love if you have some overlap or you have some extra work in design to give me a shot. That would have been an alien thought at Omnicom. Here, I'm like, you know what? We've got a pitch right now. You seem like you've got the passion. You're telling me you've got the bandwidth to make it happen. We're going to do it. And it's as quick as making that decision. So I need to unlearn the over-processed stuff that I think creates these artificial barriers between opportunities and people.
Scott, how much of that is driven by client, though? So you brought up a great example of, you worked a lot with Novartis, you worked in pharma. That's a requirement, right?
Sure.
I mean, that kind of hardcore process-driven work is a requirement, or the lawsuits are tremendous.
Yes.
So, because one of the things that I did love about Omnicom is that you could, when I was a part of it, you could be an entrepreneur within the engine.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that started to change. So how much of that was driven by client? How much of that was driven by Merkley itself because of the size of the organization? Where do you think is the real, driving factor behind that?
Yeah, another good question. I think the answer to that is finding the credible spaces where flexibility and stretching is encouraged and not putting the work at risk. So I would not
quality. It's a quality question.
Exactly. So when we're talking about FDA submissions and project management, I'm not really going to say, hey, we love your creativity on how we submit that in a compliant manner to the FDA. But you'd be surprised that, it's not even a surprise, but there are things where it's just cost of doing business in big pharma or even biotech, which is a competency that I think Luckie has, and I worked a lot at Merkley. There are places where we know things are inflexible, right? But that shouldn't then, I think, cast the tonality for the entire piece of business. So you have a very process-oriented, MLR and the way things go through the system on their end. That doesn't mean that I think the strategy team can't be looking to challenge conventional wisdom on a target audience. Doesn't mean that we can't be leveraging unexpected inspiration from a brand identity standpoint to change the creative tone. So I think this is where a little bit of the kind of sussing out the opportunity, a bit of the, as the cliche goes, the art with the science, but knowing where to flex based on the nature of the business, I think is part of what makes kind of an entrepreneurial agency work. Because to your point, you could have the most creative, inspiring culture forever, you ever had. But if then you screw up the annotations on what you're submitting, that will be a very short-lived partnership that you have. So
right, you won't be creative for long. But I love your point about, and that's what I wanted to get to for our listeners to recognize. There's a difference between, there's a quality element, but then there's a cultural element where you're constantly changing and evolving. And the most important thing I heard you say is we don't have to do it that way just because we've always done it that way. Because even those rote processes that you have to get right, there's innovation, there's efficiencies, you can still bring creativity to that just in a very different way, to make sure that it never breaks.
Perfect. And it's again, everything you're saying is very timely.